OnePlus came out of the gate guns blazing with the OnePlus One. So I thought it was only right that I take a look at the OnePlus 2 here in 2024. How's it holding up? I'm Miggy the Tech Guy, and let's find out. First, we're going to talk about build quality with the OnePlus 2. The OnePlus 2 was built with metal rails and a sandstone backing. Although you could replace it with different materials such as wood or leather, it came default with that sandstone backing, which in my opinion feels the best in the hand. And although this device that I have here currently, 9 years later, does have some scratches and shows it's aging a bit and some wear around the metal around the charging port, it's built brilliantly and feels great in the hand. When you're holding this device, it feels solid. It feels like a device that you would not want to put a case on, which is also very nice because this device is a bit thick for its time. It did come with a larger battery in it, and that was awesome for them to put that in there because, you know, a lot of phones that during that time, they had pretty small cells in them and they didn't really consistently last all day. And this device you could rock without a case confidently because it doesn't slip out of your hand. It's not like glass where it would just slide off of a table. It holds very steady. It doesn't really have a camera bump, which is also super nice. Yeah, it's only rocking one camera because 9 years ago they didn't really have multiple cameras, but overall the size and the feel in the hand and just everything about it feels premium. And even when it was released at under $400, so it was beating a lot of its flagship competition. This was where flagship killer really was ramping up in the masses. Yes, you still needed an invite for this phone, so you couldn't just pick it up on a whim. But that being said, under $400 for a device that's built this well and really contended with all of the big names like Samsung and Apple of its time, I think that speaks volumes here in 2024 and how well it actually holds up with its build quality. It feels so good in the hand, and I cannot understate that by any amount. It feels so good to hold it, and just the feel of what kind of phone this was, and even holding up 9 years later in 2024 is so impressive to me. You look at this and it gives you a really positive vibe for its build quality, for sure. On the side here, it does have that tried and true alert slider that we have come to love with OnePlus and its brand. They did kind of venture off with the 10T, and I think they heard the community and they brought it right back with the OnePlus 11. So I'm really glad that they decided to keep that, because while they didn't start out with the alert slider, every phone after the OnePlus 2 had this alert slider on it, and for OnePlus that's kind of their signature at this point. So that being left out of the 10T was kind of a bummer in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. That's not in this video. I'm not talking about the 10T. I'm talking about here the OnePlus 2. And when it comes to build quality, how it really holds up here in 2024, it truly impressed me with its build quality personally. And I would not have a problem putting this in somebody's hand and being like, how much do you think this device is worth, without looking at the screen? Of course, this screen on the front is 5.5 inches and not AMOLED, which has huge bezels, and they did house a fingerprint scanner in the front here and the speaker and the selfie camera in it. So understandably so, 9 years ago we were still seeing the regular 16:9 ratio in screens, and you know, that's something of its time. I'm not going to super knock it here in 2024 because obviously we have pretty much all screen at this point, and we do have phones that are all screen and whatnot. But this device here, for its time, I think held up really well. It was 1080p quality, and a lot of devices at that time were 1080p, and a lot of devices nowadays come 1080p stock out of the box. So I'm not going to knock it for having those thick bezels. Again, 9 years ago, of course that's what it is, but it does hold up in its color reproduction and just overall nice picture quality. It's not super dull, and for a screen of its time, I think it held up really well against this competition. And here in 2024, obviously it does not match anything here, even in the budget realm for the most part. You can find some budget phones that are 720p, I believe still, which again is a bummer, but overall, the build quality from the back to the front of the display is a major go, even here in 2024 in my opinion. Yes, aside from those bezels, and I understand that, but for the most part, the build quality is a go. Next, we're going to talk about software. And with the OnePlus 2, it did only go to about Nougat, I believe, on this device. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I did not research that. But for the most part, it started out on Lollipop, Oxygen OS, which was the first time they brought Oxygen OS, their own software, to the table because their deal with CyanogenMod was kind of going south and a little bit sour, which is a unfortunate bummer for the community, but for this growing company as a whole, them making Oxygen OS was a really big turnaround and a really fresh restart that turned out to be a really great thing for them to do, because they brought stock Android with a little OnePlus flair on it with a little bit of extra things like you can draw on the display to open the camera and the flashlight and all that stuff, and you could actually do system-wide dark mode before a lot of people could do that, and I thought that was really awesome of them to include that. So there was a lot of customization to tinker with back in the day, and that was impressive to me, especially back then. Yes, it didn't update super long because most phones didn't back then, and we're only recently seeing 4 years to 7 years of updates, so we can't knock it for that. From 9 years ago, it was actually, you know, pretty run-of-the-mill in terms of software updates, actually slightly above average in most cases, so I think that was impressive. But what's really impressive is that there are people still in the OnePlus community putting ROMs on this device, and I have here Lineage OS Android 13 on this bad boy, so it is more modern. I believe there is Android 14 ROMs out there for this device, but I decided to just keep it more stable and keep it on Android 13 because there's a lot of wishy-washy things going on in the community with full-on support of Android 14, and in my OnePlus 7T I put Android 14 on there and it did have a fingerprint scanner bug, so I decided Android 13 was going to probably be best on this device, and let me tell you guys, it actually runs really well, surprisingly well. And I think the reason being is because it does have 4 gigs of RAM, which in its time was more future-proofing than a lot of devices, because 4 gigs of RAM was more the future than it was the past back then. A lot of devices had 3 gigabytes of RAM, and there was a model that did have 3 gigs of RAM, the cheaper version of this OnePlus 2. This model with the 64 gigs of storage and 4 gigs of RAM was really impressive to me, and I think that's part of why it does hold up in the fluidity department. It opens apps rather quickly, it can download and install apps pretty quickly. Again, the storage speed isn't as fast as modern devices, but for the most part it holds up day to day, and I think you could use this device as a backup device, and that to me is a little bit impressive. Like I was a little shocked to see that you could download modern apps. You could use your TikTok, albeit there are some issues I seen when I initially downloaded the app, but after a while it kind of went away and you could just scroll to your heart's content. But for the most part, the speed and fluidity was actually rather solid, and like I said, you could use this device as a backup if your phone broke or something like that and you had this in a drawer. You could pop your SIM in, use this device with a custom ROM on it, of course, which isn't super hard to do. There are tutorials out there on how to custom ROM your devices nowadays, but I'm not going to do that here in today's video, sorry guys, but for the most part, the software experience was definitely holding up in 2024 because I put Android 13 on it and modernized it. It helped tremendously in the feel and fluidity of the device, like I said. So as far as software goes, with an asterisk of gaming, I will talk about that in the gaming section, but this device for the most part holds up way better than I expected it to, and I think you would not mind the speed as much, especially as far as social media apps and scrolling and just looking at memes and maybe watching videos goes. It can do all of those things rather well. So in my opinion, that's really cool to see, and I think you would also not mind it to actually use it as a backup phone if you really needed to. And again, that's due to the 4 gigabytes of RAM rather than the 3 gigabytes of RAM a lot of these devices had, so it's nice to see it here. But for software, it's not going to blow you out of the water, but it's kind of an iffy thing. It's kind of like a go and not a go, because again, you're not going to just buy this device and use it as your main device, but as a backup device you could, so it's kind of a go for me here in 2024. Next, we're going to talk about the camera on the OnePlus 2. And guys, I'm happy to report the OnePlus 2 camera holds up pretty well here in 2024. But I'm gonna shut up and show you guys some images first. So as you can see, the OnePlus 2 camera spits out some pretty decent images. Yes, you have to give it a lot of light, and in a large dynamic range situation, it's not gonna do as well, it's gonna struggle a bit, but for the most part, if you got good lighting, you can get a really nice shot in here, and I think you could post it on social media just fine here in 2024, and people wouldn't really be that upset about it. It holds up pretty well, in my opinion. Yes, I'm using the Lineage OS camera on this device, and I think that helps it. Yeah, there's a little bit of a focusing issue in my opinion for the most part, but when it's in good lighting, you can get a solid focus point, and you can take a good picture. And as you've seen there, I think a lot of the photos hold up pretty well. There are some instances where it didn't capture enough dark and light areas at the same time, and that's in those dynamic range situations, but in those good lighting situations and close-up situations, it took pretty impressive photos, and I'm gonna say it right now, I think the camera holds up solidly in 2024, and I think it's kind of a go. Next, we're gonna talk about battery and charging on the OnePlus 2. So this is actually another area where I was thinking I wasn't going to be happy with it, but I am a bit happy. Yes, it does have slower charging because it's not fast charging equipped, but that is at the cost of it being USB Type-C, which back then was one of the forerunners. It was one of the first devices to meet that standard. Not a lot of devices had it for its time, and I think for them to be gladiators in this realm and just pushing forward and being the people who decided to bring it first is really impressive to me. It shows that OnePlus was at a great trajectory back in the day, and they really wanted to prove themselves. Yes, again, it didn't have fast charging, but it charged okay. It takes a little while to charge this device from 0 to 100%. But that's not what I'm that worried about. I was worried about how the actual battery life holds up throughout the day, and can you get through a day of use? Guys, yes you can. Even now, I was impressed with this device. Because the one that I bought off of eBay here does show signs of use and wear and tear, I was expecting the battery life to be abysmal, especially 9 years later, but it actually held up pretty well with my testing while I was playing games, downloading apps, taking pictures, normal scrolling, doing all the normal stuff on this device. This battery life actually held up really well. I was super impressed with that, you guys. It's not the battery champ, especially nowadays it's not. But back in the day, it was 100% a contender, and I think you could have gotten 1 to 1.5 days of usage out of this device, and that's impressive, especially for a device of its time in 2015 to 2024, for its battery to kind of hold up even now and like go through these tests and not die in the middle of me doing so. I think that really shows its true colors and where OnePlus's head was at coming out the gate with the OnePlus 1 and the OnePlus 2. So that impressed me tremendously. And I have to say that the battery life is kind of a go here in 2024 as well. And now we'll talk about gaming with the OnePlus 2. And here is where I was like a little confused, because the performance and the fluidity of the OnePlus 2 was actually pretty impressive for me, and I thought that the gaming would hold up a lot better here in 2024, especially updating it to Android 13. I thought I would be like, okay, sweet, we can download some games, but for the most part, it struggled even playing some pretty minor games, like Temple Run was really glitchy, and I was having issues playing that, and I think it's because of its GPU really lacking here in 2024, and a lot of these apps are updated for more modern times. So in that regard, gaming, you're not really gonna buy it for this. I mean, you can play your Temple Runs, your Subway Surfers, and Angry Birds. I played Monster Dash on this, and I'm sure you could play other half-brick games, but for the most part, you can't really play any 3D titles. And even like I said, in Temple Run 2, it does give it a run for its money at some points, and I'll show that on screen. But for the most part, it's just like, it was kind of puzzling to me, because while the performance was kind of a go here in 2024, I don't really recommend it for gaming. I was having some issues with the Tetris app, and it just not working right, and really laggy, and not really allowing me to play the game. So I don't know if that's an Android 13 Lineage OS issue, or if it's just this device's issue with its GPU and starting to show its age with its processor and RAM. But for the most part, going through and going on social media and all that stuff worked out just fine. But for gaming, I don't really see a reason to use this device unless you really have a simple game to, pass the time, like playing Subway Surfer or something minor like that. Even Monster Dash held up pretty reasonably in my opinion. But for the most part, the gaming experience isn't gonna wow you, and it doesn't match what the general day-to-day performance of this device was, especially here in 2024. So if I had to talk about gaming and give it a rating, I think it's definitely on the lower end of things, and it's definitely not a go here in 2024. So there you have it, folks. That's the OnePlus 2 review. It's very simple, quickly broken down for you guys. I just wanted to see how this device held up 9 years later for you. If you had a nostalgia trip with this device, if you've used this device, I want to hear it in the comments. This is the first OnePlus device that I ever dailied, and so for me this is super nostalgic. It was really awesome to take a look down memory lane with this device and see how well it holds up, because I did use this, like I said, day to day for quite a few months, and I do switch phones a lot. I'm a big phone nerd, so I've used tons of phones, especially even around the time I used this one. But the OnePlus brand as a whole really started to speak volumes to me, and even today I am maining a OnePlus 11. And so if this tells you anything, the OnePlus brand stuck with me. And it's, you know, they were taking a little weird turn with the 10 series, and I did have a 10 Pro and I wound up selling that, and I was about to just completely jump ship and go a different direction, but the OnePlus 11 really sold me back on it. So I'm happy to report that OnePlus is doing really great, and since the OnePlus 2, I'm happy with the brand as a whole. Yes, they changed up a bit after Carl Pei left, and I understand that, but this was awesome to take a look at, and I'm really glad that I got to review it for you guys and just give a little showcase of what 9 years ago used to look like, especially in a phone form and especially in a flagship killer form. So if you guys have any questions or have any things to say about the OnePlus 2, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to see why you didn't like the device, why you don't like OnePlus. Let's just have a conversation in the comments. Let's talk about it. But that's all, guys. At the end of the day ends. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you dislike this video, go ahead and hit the dislike button. If you really like this video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get more content from me. And as always, I'm Mega the Tech Guy, and I am out. Peace.